All right. Rocking and rolling. I should have checked my audio before I started this. Because my speaker was input. Yeah, we got it. We got you. We got you beat. Okay, I'm just gonna read this because I just finished reading it for the first time, the article that I have in the description, and it's amazing. So I'm just gonna read it. Printed it off because I like, and look at that, there's a mosaic up top. Who would have guessed it? So this is McLuhan. The medium is the Messiah. McLuhan's religion and its relationship to his media theory from Second Nature Journal. Here we go. So, to say that Marshall McLuhan was incidentally a Christian, or that his Catholicism was just part of his private life, is a little like saying that Karl Marx was only incidentally a Marxist. This essay will attempt to reconcile the seeming contradiction between the Marshall McLuhan who had, quote, no theory of communication, end quote, and was simply a detached, objective observer, and the Marshall McLuhan who was a devout and faithful Catholic who attended Mass daily, raised 6 children in the church, and left a posthumous legacy of some of the most compelling, provocative, and stunning insights into the nature of religion under electronic conditions. To put it briefly, the Catholic faith informed McLuhan's theories in a manner similar to the way Einstein's C functioned, as the one constant in the universe to which and against which all else could be measured. Everything might be relative, but it is relative only in relation to the one thing that is not relative. For McLuhan, this was not the speed of light, but the incarnation of Christ. A fact or, quote, thing, end quote, that was not altogether separate from McLuhan's understanding of what light was. For him, quote, equilibrium is a principle inherited from Newton. No balance is possible at the speed of light, in economics, in physics, in the church, or wherever, end quote. From The Medium is the Light. Here is how Nicholas Carr puts it in his review of Douglas Copeland's recent McLuhan biography, Copeland's. Neither his fans nor his foes saw him clearly. The central fact of McLuhan's life, as Copeland makes it clear, was his conversion, at the age of 25, to Catholicism, and his subsequent devotion to the religion's rituals and tenets. Though he never discussed it, his faith forms the moral and intellectual backdrop of all of his mature work. What lay in store, McLuhan believed, was the timelessness of eternity. The earthly conceptions of past, present, and future were, by comparison, of little consequence. His role as a thinker was not to celebrate or denigrate the world, but simply to understand it, to recognize the patterns that would unlock history's secrets and thus provide hints of God's design. His job was not dissimilar, as he saw it, from that of the artist. Here is how Douglas Copeland puts it himself. Marshall, like most converts, quickly became hardcore. Zealotry, I like it. He went to Mass almost daily, every day for the rest of his life. He recited the rosary. He was a firm believer in hell. He was disgusted that other Catholics weren't Catholic enough. Above all, he believed that because God made the world, it must, in the end, be comprehensible, and that a sense of the divine could lead to understanding of the mundane. He came to see that his religion was indeed a sense, a sensory perception that colored his life as much as, if not more than, sight, taste, touch, hearing, smell, or gravity. The future, compared to heaven, was down market, to be viewed dispassionately, as though prognosticating an ant farm, a kind of acutely observed obliviousness. Marshall, I have a bunch of highlighted stuff, so can you guys hear me? He cracked up. Marshall didn't publicly discuss his religion. His theory was that people who can't see don't walk around saying, I'm seeing things all day. They simply see the world. And so with religion, it was simply there with him. One of his most famous aphorisms was equally theological. If I hadn't believed it, I wouldn't have seen it. Eric McLuhan, in the introduction to his posthumous collection, The Medium and the Light, Reflections on Religion, confirms Copeland's analysis by saying that, quote, faith is a mode of perception, end quote. Quick aside, someone quoted that in, I think so PBK is doing a live stream on Ken Lowry's talk with the guy who recently converted. What's his name? Whatever. It's on Climbing Mount Sophia. And I saw that in a comment, and I searched it and found this thing. So, okay. So Eric McLuhan quoted that faith is a mode of perception in his posthumous collection. In that work, McLuhan himself discusses faith in terms of concepts versus percepts. So this is a quote. There is a great contrast between perceptual and conceptual confrontation. And I think that the, quote, death of Christianity, or, quote, the death of God, occurs the moment they become concept. As long as they remain percept, directly involving the perceiver, they are alive. All meaning is personal. This perception was in fact precisely how McLuhan came into the church, and he said, the only way one could leave it. I came in on my knees. That is the only way in. When people start praying, they need truths. That's all. You don't come into church by ideas and concepts, and you cannot leave by mere disagreement. It has to be a loss of faith, a loss of participation. You can tell when people leave the church, they have quit praying. Finally, McLuhan made it clear that academics were the modern scribes and Pharisees, that these were unable to perceive anything as a result of their concepts. When asked by Hubert Hoskins, if I were to say that the traditional Christian doctrine of the incarnation could be expressed by the phrase, quote, Christ is the medium and the message, end quote, is that a percept or a concept? McLuhan had this to say. It is a percept because, as Christ said over and over again, it is visible to babes, but not to sophisticates. The sophisticated, the conceptualizers, the scribes and the Pharisees, these had too many theories to be able to perceive anything. Concepts are wonderful buffers for preventing people from confronting any form of percept. 1 Corinthians. So if this is the case, then perhaps a general view of McLuhan's entire career is worth considering in light of his most deeply held conviction. To begin, it is helpful to remember that from early to late, from his first publication to his last, McLuhan was a Christian thinker concerned with Christian truth. His first published piece was, quote, G.K. Chesterton, a Practical Mystic, published in the Dalhousie Review in January 1936. Chesterton was instrumental in McLuhan's conversion in March of the following year and whetted McLuhan's appetite for ideas more than any other thinker. McLuhan's first book, The Mechanical Bride, 51, was reviewed by his former student Walter Ong with these words. Professor McLuhan does not treat explicitly or dogmatic or liturgical implications, but he leaves open 100 doors here into every area of Catholic life. Knowing him as a former member of the English faculty at St. Louis University and as present professor of English at St. Michael's College at the University of Toronto, we are aware that he does this quite deliberately. The official McLuhan narrative tells the story that Mechanical Bride was the last of McLuhan's moralizing books. After this, he became the detached observer. But it's not really the case at all. The Gutenberg Galaxy, 62, is almost entirely about church history and the impact of the printing press on medieval Catholic Europe. Even his most canonical work, Understanding Media, 64, is ultimately a warning against the idolatry of technology, in which he invokes both William Blake and Psalm 115 to tell us that we, quote, we become what we behold, end quote. In this same work, McLuhan says, quote, that that is why we must, to use them at all, serve these objects, these extensions of ourselves as gods or minor religions. Which is the same point that Neil Postman made years later in describing technology as a god that we worship in technopoly, the surrender of technopoly to culture. Or technology to culture, excuse me. That technology was a false god was Postman's point. That is where a real god worthy of worship was McLuhan's point. We also know that in addition to being a devout practicing Catholic, McLuhan was profoundly intellectually and spiritually indebted to the Mother of God. He had direct connection to the Blessed Virgin Mary, an associate recalls. He alluded to it very briefly once, almost fearfully, in a please don't laugh at me tone. He didn't say, quote, I know this because the Blessed Virgin Mary told me, but it was clear from what he said that he was interrogating her about his ideas, and one of the reasons he was so sure about certain things was that the Virgin had certified his understanding of them. McLuhan's last publication was, of course, his tombstone, which reads in LCD font from 1980, "The truth shall make you free." This is a highly specific reference to with highly specific meanings. The truth, quote truth here, refers to Christ in the passage from the Gospel of John 8:32. It is from the King James Version, the post-Reformation Gospel of 1611 that Protestants used, and may thus have been McLuhan's attempt to speak to, quote, the Greeks, parentheses, the conceptualizers, or Protestants in his view, in a language they could hear. But it is also from the fourth, final, and most analogical of the Gospels. It is this, and only this Gospel, that the equation is made between Christ and the Word or Logos in John 1. In other words, if the Word is Christ, then the medium is the Messiah. This has huge implications for McLuhan's media theory, which was a lifelong exploration of the ways in which words, quote, language, were a technology, and the ways in which technologies operated analogically as words. We see this concern straight through McLuhan from his dissertation on the classical trivium, really a document on church history, and only incidentally about Thomas Nash in its final chapter, all the way through to his posthumously published Laws of Media, 88, in which he makes the purpose and focus of media study explicitly linguistic. Here, for instance, is the opening sentence, quote, one fundamental discovery upon which the essay rests is that each of man's artifacts is in fact a kind of word, a metaphor, that translates experience from one form into another, end quote. But linguistics is just another term for the grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, which the ancients, like his hero Quintilian, saw as distinguishable from good theology. On page 31 of his dissertation, McLuhan says, I should like to point out how Quintilian's ideal grammarian is for St. Augustine, the ideal theologian. And McLuhan was in many ways still not entirely understood by his critics. A medieval grammarian far more than a modernist English professor or a precursor to postmodern philosophy in his media prophecies. And so the theological underpinning is there, but only for those with ears to hear its multi-layered meanings. This quote, the space of early Greek cosmology was structured by logos resonant utterance or word, end quote, McLuhan. This is the same logos of John 1. 2 pages later, we get, quote, logos is the formal cause of the cosmos and all things, responsible for their nature and configuration, end quote. But both of these are the key quotes in bold font of their respective pages, but the latter is about as close to a rephrasing of John 1:1-3 as you can get. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And for McLuhan, it was not accidental that Christianity began in the Greco-Roman culture. I don't think that Christ would have suffered under Genghis Khan with the same meaning as under Pontius Pilate. The Greeks had invented a medium, the phonetic alphabet, which made it possible for men to have, for the first time in history, a sense of private identity. I underline this. A sense of private, substantial identity, a self, is to this day utterly unknown to tribal societies. The rise of the person and the individual, the true self and the false self, which McLuhan will get to this too. Eric McLuhan recently reformulated this in his presentation as follows. Now, we believe that each of us is endowed with an individual soul since conception, and the concomitant and individual conscience. The private individual with its private self is also charged with private responsibility for his or her own actions and quests for private salvation. The alphabet literally paved the way for these matters. These are New Testament times. The Old Testament, for example, had declared the Jews a chosen people, group salvation. McLuhan also believed that the tetrad analysis revealed in Laws of Media could only be done on man-made objects, not on spider webs or natural processes. This conviction led him to claim that tetrad analysis could not be performed on the sacraments of the Church, but only on its heresies, offering another inverted proof of the sacrament's divine origin. So concerned with the logos or words was Laws of Media that it precedes the tetrad examples chapter with this final reminder. All human artifacts are human utterances, are outerings, and as such they are linguistic and rhetorical entities. At the same time, the etymology of all human technologies is to be found in the human body itself. They are, as it were, prosthetic devices, mutations, metaphors of the body or its parts. The tetrad is exegesis on 4 levels, showing not the mythic, but the logo structure of each artifacts, and giving its 4, quote, parts as a metaphor or word. The laws of media in tetrad form belong properly to rhetoric and grammar, not philosophy. Our concern is etymology and exegesis. This is to place the modern study of technology and artifacts on a humanistic and linguistic basis for the first time. Perhaps a closer look at McLuhan's most famous aphorism, "The medium is the message," will best illuminate the theological underpinnings of all his work. This is the key line and takeaway of understanding media and has several surface interpretations. Now we're getting into the real good stuff. The first is that it was derived from Harold Innes's work, The Basis of Communication, in which Dr. Innes pointed out that the relative time or space basis of a medium, based on whether it was maternally composed of stone or papyrus, the former being heavy and non-transportable, and parentheses, and thus lending itself to duration through time, but not distribution through space, end parenthesis, and the latter being light and portable, parenthesis, and thus lending itself to distribution through space, but not duration through time, thanks to its fragility, end quote. So like a stone tablet, duration through time, not through space. Books, duration through space, not through time. So back to the reading. By, quote, "the medium is the message," end quote, McLuhan also meant that, okay, 1, the content of any medium is always another medium. 2, the content is the, quote, "juicy piece of meat used to distract the watchdog of the mind," end quote. 3, that the message of any medium is really the change in scale, pace, or pattern it created. And 4, that the content is the effect on the individual or culture. The aphorism was a brilliant soundbite reduction of many related ideas into one pithy Zen koan. It implied that form had as much or more meaning as content, or was at the very least a very helpful thing to consider when analyzing content. But in no case was the aphorism to be taken literally, except perhaps one. Now, this blew my mind this morning when I was reading this. In understanding media, we can get the one case where it is literal in electric light. Quote, "The electric light is pure information." Ignoring. Can you hear the phone call? You probably can on this mic. Okay. So this is the one case where we get literal. The electric light is pure information. It is a medium without a message. The use to which it is put is, quote, "a matter of indifference," because it is the medium that shapes and controls the scale and form of human association and action, end quote. The electric light escapes attention as a communication medium just because it has, quote, "no content." The message of the electric light is like the message of electric power in industry, totally radical, pervasive, and decentralized. For electric light and power are separate from their uses, yet they eliminate time and space factors in human association, exactly as do radio, telephone, telegraph, and TV, creating involvement and depth. Several chapters later, McLuhan states that, quote, "if a student of media will but meditate on the power of this medium of electric light to transform every structure of time and space and work and society that it penetrates or contacts, he will have the key to the form of the power that is in all media to reshape any lives they touch." Finally, he says, quote, "except for light, all other media come in pairs, with one acting as the content of the other, obscuring the operation of both." This reads like an oracular pronunciation with spiritual implications, and indeed it is. For McLuhan, it is in fact setting up a dichotomy between the false light and the true light. Happy dance. Jesus Christ is, theologically speaking, the light of the world. John 8:12. The same book and chapter, though different verse, of McLuhan's tombstone tells us, quote, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life," end quote. But Satan is also theologically connected to the light. He was described as, quote, "an angel of light." in 2 Corinthians 11:14, and as a prince of the power of the air in Ephesians 2:1-2. The name Lucifer, Luke, means light bearer, and Christ seems to be referencing both his, quote, angel of light and the prince of the power of the air significance when he says of him in Luke 10:18, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So if Scripture sets up Christ as the true light and Satan, Antichrist, as the false light, then it should come as no surprise that McLuhan's interpretations follow the same lines. Here is McLuhan on Jesus, the true light, or true light of true light. At the instant of incarnation, the structure of the universe was changed. All creation was remade. There was a new physics, a new matter, a new world, a new creation. I have that highlighted, and then I wrote here, dude, because that's intense. All right. The revealed and divinely constituted fact of religion. I think, okay, so am I reading right? Yeah. The revealed and divinely constituted fact of religion has nothing to do with human opinion or human adherence. Other religions, so parentheses, other religions have all fascination of any other massive cultural achievement. They were rendered obsolete at the moment of the incarnation, and they remain so. Quick interjection. I've said this before. The plethora of choices, the buffet of choices of religions that we have is false. We have two, Christ or Antichrist, truth or falsehood. There's a new reality. Yeah, anyhow, back to the thing. Okay. And here's McLuhan on Satan, the false light. Electric information environments being utterly ethereal fosters the illusion of the world as spiritual substance. It is now a reasonable facsimile of the mystical body, a blatant manifestation of the Antichrist. After all, the prince of this world is a very great electric engineer. Man. The prince of this world is a great PR man, a great salesman of new hardware and software, a great electric engineer, and a great master of the media. It is his master stroke not to be only environmental but invisible, for the environment is invincibly persuasive when ignored. Yeah. This could be the time of the Antichrist, when electricity allows for the simultaneity of all information for every human being. It is Lucifer's moment. He is the greatest electrical engineer. Technically speaking, the age in which we live is certainly favorable to an Antichrist. Just think. Each person can instantly be tuned to a, quote, new Christ and mistake him for the real Christ. Furthermore, McLuhan said that just as the Roman clergy defected in the Gutenberg era on the illusion of the inner light, even greater numbers may be expected to defect under the mystical attractions of the electric light. This is particularly insightful bit of media history, and perhaps more insightful than even McLuhan knew. Prior to the printing press, metallurgist Johannes Gutenberg, I didn't know those, was in the business of manufacturing pilgrims' mirrors for the pilgrimage to Aachen, Aachen. By virtue of getting the wrong year, he was forced to give up his secrets for printing to his business investors, and the rest is history. The pilgrims' mirrors were handheld religious trinkets made of polished metal whose purpose was to capture a ray of holy light emanating from the icons and images of church processionals. They were a means of taking home with you a token of your religious experience. Turning God into mammon, maybe. So the use of a physical medium to capture a, quote, holy light has a rich and intertwined history in the evolution of media from religious artifact to holy scripture to electronic media. McLuhan did once in 1967 speak in a way that made it seem possible that electric media would be a means through which scripture might be fulfilled. Christ plays an Antichrist. Here perhaps my own religious faith has some bearing. I think of human charity as a total responsibility of all for all. Therefore, my energies are directed at far more than mere political or democratic intent. Democracy as a byproduct of certain technologies like literacy and mechanical and industry is not something that I would take very seriously. But democracy as it belongs very profoundly with Christianity is something I take very seriously indeed. There have been many more religious men than I who have not made even the most faltering steps in this direction. Once I began to move in this direction, I began to see that it had profound religious meaning. I do not think it my job to point this out. For example, the Christian concept of the mystical body, all men as members of the body of Christ. This becomes technologically a fact under electronic conditions. However, I would not try to theorize on the basis of my understanding of technology. I don't have a background in scholastic thought, never having been raised in any Catholic institution. Indeed, I have been bitterly reproached by my Catholic, I don't know this word, confreres, for my lack of scholastic terminology and concepts. But that was 1967 when McLuhan was still enjoying his glory days as a pop culture superstar, being heralded as the oracle of the electric age, and knowing full well that stepping into religious territory would get him in hot water fast with both his colleagues and, as he says, his Catholic confreres. The other clue that this was a false start was that he speaks of the concept of the mystical body, having not yet had this realization 10 years later that faith was entirely about percept. So the true McLuhan, who seems to recognize the full spiritual significance of his media theory by 1977, is the one to whom we should listen. For him, the electric light was the false light, and Christ was the true light. And his most famous aphorism was literally true in one and only case. Here we go. We're wrapping it up. In Jesus Christ, there is no distance or separation between the medium and the message. It is the one case where we can say that the medium and the message are fully one and the same. All other media were ultimately not just false lights, but false messiahs. That electricity was a false light was equally clear to Vladimir Lenin, who said in 1918 during a conversation with Leonid Krasin on the electrification of Russia, "Let the peasant pray to electricity. He's going to feel the power of the central authorities more than that of heaven." Perhaps the best way of understanding McLuhan was already been said by the Canadian Tina Eden in her graduate thesis. The key to understanding McLuhan's Catholicism, his media theory, or McLuhan himself, is not to simply read what he is saying, but to participate in understanding how he is saying it. For the user is the content. Thus, whether one subscribes to his religious philosophy or not, one must acknowledge that McLuhan's, quote, objectivity was both a function of his religiosity, and that without his religious framework, undergirding his entire life in media theory, McLuhan could not have been McLuhan. His detached neutrality was a function of his complete attachment to a world that Jacques Ellul described as, quote, utterly unverifiable. There you go, T-Grog. Utterly unverifiable. And yet, without it, McLuhan could not have inspired countless secular scholars to this day. In the merely secular world, quote, all media exist to invest our lives with artificial perception and arbitrary values, end quote. True perception, for McLuhan, was only possible for the true medium, which was the incarnate Christ. This may explain McLuhan's otherwise utterly enigmatic statement, quote, and the process of perception is that of incarnation, end quote. Though he never coined the phrase, the medium is the Messiah, may have been McLuhan's ultimate perceptual insight. The medium is the message may have been merely its conceptual phrasing. That's it. That's it. Man, is that all my things? See, I love it when something like that happens. When you just go, like, I've never read McLuhan. I don't know McLuhan. But this is like this is all my things. Before I ever said them, and I didn't even know. So good. All right, I'm going to go back and read through some comments. All right, let's see. What are we saying? Oh, I should just put out the invite because people can come and play. And I'll read comments until people come and play. How about that? What are we saying? Paul, the Lucasandra mode is strong. Why don't people listen to me? Yeah, I'm a needy person. How many Christian denominations? A lot. But this is like, I don't know, in a way, people have talked about this. I mean, and this is true. We're in this medium of light. He was just talking about this, where it's the rise of the individual. And it's not arbitrary. that individualism and the person arrive in the era of technology of light, and that leads to radical individualism, which is each being the interpretive person himself. But that's I would argue that is what you meant for evil, I meant for good. That is also the means by which, and the suffering through which God is doing our person making. All right, what else do we have? Assertion, opinion. All right. Clip me doing the eyebrow thing. All right. I don't want to. So I'm going to look at new comments. Yeah, exactly. Paul says Luke traveled back in time, tutored McLuhan, doesn't get the credit. There's some way that this is the linear progression of time, the assumption of the linear progression of time. In my understanding, it's is this a Heideggerian thing with Dasein being there, but a huge part of the way that we, I don't know, perceive and conceive of the world is related to your Dasein, your being there. I think this is a Heideggerian idea. And so in the West, we have that's one of the assumptions, I think, of a Western consciousness, is that we assume this linear progression of time, which I think is probably related to our language and this Greek Phoenician phonetic language that we have somehow. I don't know. I don't know exactly how it works, but retrocausality. I mean, we're even getting this through modern quantum mechanics. Like superpositions, and you think about like interstellar and black holes and gravity and relativity and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. How does all that stuff work? Retrocausality. I mean, we see that in Interstellar at the bookshelf, right? In the Morse code. That was Matthew McConaughey's future self trying to talk to his past self. And how do all those things overlap and relate? Heck if I know. There is some degree that I've thought this is a relation of names. It's the whole what's in a name, Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose, Romeo and Juliet, what's in a name? Would a rose by any other name be any less sweet? I think that there are morphic fields and relational patterns that exist outside of space and time, because that's Rupert Sheldrake's whole theory of names. And I think when people are properly named and they're not completely arbitrarily named, like some name that has no harmony with what has come before, like some completely novel made up thing, like, I don't know, Ladasha or something like that, where it's like LA-AH or something. Like, what is that? I don't know. But like Luke, I am related some way to the writer of the gospel, to the Saint Luke, somehow to Lucifer. I think all Lukes are related. So I don't know. I need to read Origin. I think that's what I think. Yeah, Luke the Apologist, exactly. Luke Lucifer eyebrows. I'm guessing it would be better if the priest with secret knowledge told us what to do. Maybe, but again, this is a trust. This is the fractal reality of the fall, out of the oceanic oneness of the mother, out of the birth canal, and you enter into the world, but then you are, by degrees of separation, you cut the umbilical cord, and then you're nursing at the breast, and then you're being fed, and then eventually you start feeding yourself, and then eventually, you become an adolescent, and then you start leaving, and then you cleave with the father and mother, and you go out on your own. At some point, you have to learn how to feed yourself. You can be given. This happened, I think, like there was this line in here where it said, I don't know. I would love it if Jewish people are here, or Chezi is here or something. But I wrote new wineskins here because this thing, it's like, now we believe that each of us is endowed with an individual soul since conception, and it's concomitant and individual conscience. The private individual with its private self is also charged with private responsibility for his or her own actions in quest for private salvation. The alphabet literally paved the way for these matters. These are New Testament times. The Old Testament, for example, had declared the Jews a chosen people, group salvation. We moved from group tribal consciousness into maybe like national consciousness. This reminds me of the Peugeot Richard Roland conversation about nationalism, right, in Germany. And then we've moved into individual consciousness. And all of this has to do with the evolution of the true person. This is why I say there's a false dichotomy between inner and outer, and the secret sacred self and the outside and self. Like, this is very much with George MacDonald's The Imagination. The inside is the outside, and deep calls to deep. You could not recognize anything outside of yourself if there wasn't a resonant harmony inside of yourself. All thinking, and concept and percept. Concept is in the realm of, this gets into probably my ideas of like iconic thinking and mosaic vision, is that you can only fall from grace through concept. But the perception itself, the raw phenomenology, which includes the conception and the naming and the wording and the metacognition, is both greater than, but including all that stuff. It's the apprehension of reality itself, and you have to have the person. This is what I said to you, T-Grog, in our last conversation, is that it's the hard problem of all consciousness, and not just of all perception. We talk about the hard problem of consciousness. It's the hard problem of perception. You need a perceiver. You need a person to perceive. Michael's here. I'll keep reading through comments. Welcome, friend. Paul is in what chat? The Grail Country chat? Mustache twirling. Oh, there, I hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can, buddy.
Okay. I forgot that. Oh, crap. I was connected to the Bluetooth in my car, and that messed stuff up. Now it thinks I'm sideways. I don't know why it's doing this in the browser.
We can just look at you sideways.
I'll just keep it at a weird angle. All right. What do I do? What do I do with this revelation you've given us?
Which part? Which revelation?
I don't know. You tell me. You just said it's all of your things in one little spiel. So.
Well, so my answer to that, what it makes me think of, is that in one of Sherry's Grail Country live streams, where I think they were going, I'm trying to remember which one it was. They were going through a George MacDonald thing. Maybe it was his faith essay. Because essentially that's what I would say, is they said in there that, I think it was maybe Luke Johnston that said this. Chad said it, I believe, and then Luke riffed on it, and then Sherry riffed on it. It's that be okay with where you are. That's maybe, I would say, is the takeaway. Make peace with yourself, forgive yourself, which doesn't mean, and I think the automatic conservative reaction to what I just said is to like, well then, I'm not saying don't strive to be better, don't strive to improve, don't strive to repent and purify your eye and love better and all those things. But at the same time, live, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. And I would say including yourself. I think that's the struggle for the modern that the New Testament writers weren't dealing with, because we didn't have this medium of the light that made us the kind of individuals that we are now today, is that we can live in this divided man space and because of POS theology, where you hate yourself, like even where you have, be okay with where you are, while at the same time holding the tension of which life's just going to bring to you anyhow. If you have loved ones, family members, wives, parents, children, you're going to be. I guess it's the acknowledgement that somewhat God is teaching you in all things, even in the blessings, but also in the struggles, in the pain. This probably goes back a little bit to like what T. Grog was saying yesterday, like suffering, unnecessary suffering. For the Christian, I would say most explicitly and most clearly, the suffering, Christ was made perfect by what he suffered. Even in your sufferings, be at peace. You know, St. Paul, like I've learned to be content in all things, whether in want or in plenty or in prison or whatever. Even in your anxieties and fears, I don't know. And this is all me preaching to myself, I guess, because I'm just thinking of this as you asked. Be at peace, you know, which is hard. It's hard in the modern world. There's a lot to be. It's the Sermon on the Mount. There's a lot to be worried about.
Okay.
Theoretically, in the false self, that's that bringer of light. You know, disruptor that we have, that deceiver, which we've internalized, I think, in a lot of ways.
Okay. Well, what do you think about then, you know, once we're at peace with ourselves, and then, you know, realize that the good news, there's people that need to hear the good news. So then how do we navigate that, sharing that in these new medium environments with
I don't know, to me that's never been an issue. Like I was talking about this in my last live stream. I've always been a bit of an evangelist. I mean, I don't know. It's part of my extroverted enthusiasm, you know, which is both. Hey, Andrew, I'd put you in here, but your camera's not working or something for some reason. I'm always going to talk about what I love, and I think that's because I think somewhat I used to have a little bit of I think because of a lot of assumptions that I had about reality and Christianity and metaphysics before I even knew what metaphysics was. You know, I was like, well, we got to get people, you know, you got to close the deal. We got to get people saved. You got to get them into the kingdom before they're dead, because, you know, it's appointed for man once to die, then comes judgment, Hebrews 9 or whatever. And I thought I knew what that meant, but I don't think that I do as much as I used to. And so, I think all you can do, it's a very Jordan Peterson thing, and it's something that Paul, PVK, actually exemplifies, I think, really well, which he calls his Calvinism, and I just call faith, is you're not so worried about converting people or closing the deal. You just speak the truth as clearly as you can with integrity and without lying, especially to yourself, and let the cards fall where they may. You know, you give up the anxiety about it.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not, you know, I'm just kind of like I'm not trying to figure out, like, you know, because I think we have a lot of these conversations about like the new technological means of communications, and I would say like a big contributor to like where we're at now is that, however, like people have, you know, it's like you don't have a problem with the person who like has some sort of a direct encounter with Christ, like they get it, but you know, we do have all these people who are kind of deconstructing out of a place of confusion that came from, in many ways, the way that the message has been conveyed in our
Right.
like media age. And so yeah, so I mean, you know, I think that's obviously a problem to address, or something, you know, if we're being good stewards of these things, you know, we need to be aware of it, you know, because we, you know, like I could say for instance, there's definitely a lot of pushback to the way that people have intentionally used mediums to craft a version of the gospel message that is very attractive to certain, aspects of human attention or whatever. Like, I mean, I guess that's kind of the thing. Like, if it's a seed, we've like basically designed the seed. If you think about like the parable of the sower, we've used like selective,
Spiritual engineering.
yeah, or selective breeding or something to engineer a seed that's really good at like taking that, like it's the seed itself, not even more so than the the soil, or maybe you could say like we've adapted it for the soils that where the seed will take root really quickly and spring up, but it doesn't have, it doesn't go deep or whatever, something like that. Like it has a high rate of germination, but the plants don't thrive.
So let me just think. What you made me just think of is just it made me think of relinquishing control. I'm trying to open up my thing is probably not going to allow me to have much bandwidth to do this, but I just recently this morning I was listening to Vervaeke was on the Regeneration podcast with
Oh
Michael
yeah,
Martin and Michael Soder, I think. Is that how you say his name?
yeah.
And here, so I'm going to try to find a comment in there because one of the things that stuck out to me and I put a comment on there was about relinquishing control. Let me see where this was. There was a couple good points in there. Did I write the comment on there? Oh, I'm not finding it. Because so at one point, Michael Soder asked a question about the divine feminine, and he said something like, "I don't want to reduce what you're doing to the scientific gaze," because Vervaeke's so scientific, And then he said, like, the divine feminine will run, she will confuse or hide. And then Vervaeke replied and said, and just referenced Socrates, and he said, it calls you out of a monological rationality into a dialogical rationality. And then he said, and then he talked about applying science after flow. Maybe this isn't what I'm thinking about, it was related. And I said, I need to meditate on that more. Because there's something about, I think Michael was having this fear of, I don't know, the hardcore scientific people. Like I'm sure T-Grog would think Vervaeke's very wooey, And it makes me think of like, I don't know if this is answering your question, but it's like a what I would say is the desire of science or rationality or logic or will or intellect, the desire to impose any I would say that the impulse to want to control things is rooted from idolatry, where you're always conflating the model with the reality. So you're conflating concept with percept. That's why you're fearful. That's why you're trying to control things. You can only do it at that level. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I think it's possible. You may just simply call this faith, but I think it's faith that's a little bit more complicated now because of technology and the mediums and the evolution, or at least the level of the evolution of the individual that we live in now, is that it's so much easier to live in a self-imposed trap of anxiety and fear. Like that's the modern world. If you think about it most negatively, like America, where we're like medicated to the max. It's the opioid epidemic, all the suicidality. We're all on all these drugs and anti-anxiety, and like we are almost enclosed on the self in this way that's really negative, and that's due to fear and control. But I would say that's because we're living in the world of concept rather than percept that McLuhan's talking about. And I think there's a way to, I mean, what is the means of, I would argue that the means of getting to the place of faith where you are no longer fearful, as Jesus was talking about, is to, after you've had that evolution, is to become like a small child again, where where like little kids aren't like it's almost, I mean, you know this as a father, like kids get to this level where they start living in their head and they start having fear and anxiety and they stop imagining and they start living. What is happening is they're falling from grace and starting to live in the world of concepts where these narratives that they're running in their head all the time is what's terrifying them. But that's not reality. Reality is this place of mystical wonder where little kids play. And I think that's I think if you act, that's what a saint is. If you actually become holy, and I think this is what the New Testament is talking about with like purifying your eye, where your eye is one and you're no longer double-minded, like Saint James talks about. It's where you just, like, I think he said this somewhere in here. It was really early on in the thing. You just see. Yeah. So like Marshall didn't discuss his religion. His theory was that people who can see don't walk around saying, I'm seeing things all day. They simply see the world. And so with religion, it was simply there with him. It's not even something you have to talk about all the time. I mean, in this little corner, we like to talk about it and intellectualize about it. But I think therein often lies the confusion, is you're conflating all the thinky-talky stuff for the being.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a very Gregory of Nyssa thing. It's like being versus having. You have ideas, but you just be in the world.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm thinking about this, just in like, because I work for a church and we're always trying to think like, how do we do our job or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, when you talk about like, so I see a couple things like, especially as it pertains to things like technology and stuff like that. And so like, I think of the verse in Matthew, I just pulled it up, Matthew 24:24, where he says false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. And and I'm thinking, and you're, all the way universalist. I've been thinking more in this way, like where Paul talked about or Paul had that video about the guy talking about Islam and Chalcedon and whatever, because Israel as the elect is of the nation of priests, and then everybody else is like people of simple faith. Well, people of simple faith, not worrying about heaven or hell, but we don't want them. We want them to, if we are shepherding sheep, we want to keep them safe. We don't want them to fall off a cliff.
Right.
We don't want them to be deceived. But it's interesting because, when you talked about like how kids, and my oldest is definitely has a lot of anxiety about stuff in the world. And it's interesting because I hear that narrative so much from like Christian world in regards to technology, like thinking like, what if, and I think maybe, because I think we can see like the technology is the false Christs and the false messiahs in many ways, in that it's a medium that is a message. If it's a medium that is a message, then some of that is going to be, because that's the thing. It's like, what if they really make the Skinner box or whatever that just will make people so addicted that they can't wean themselves off of it or whatever. And I mean, ultimately, it's like, okay, well, if that's possible, if it's like if there's a technology that literally can make like humans incapable of any choice or totally remove our agency, well, then that's God, and the gospel's not true. If there was a thing that was like, I mean, that's so I don't think it's going to be a totalizing thing. On the other hand, I think there is a very high possibility that, and I think we can look at technological advancements through history, that there are a lot of people that do suffer. Not everybody, there's always a remnant that kind of like survives these things. Just because like thinking about like AI apocalypse or or people just walking around with those Apple goggles on all the time, like in their weird how are you going to, and I think that's the fear, is like how is the church going to compete with that, or how is the gospel going to compete?
Yeah, I would say you don't even have to worry about it,
Well, some people don't have to worry about it. Or, well, I mean, or what do we do? We're not saying should we be in there? Should Jesus be inside the Apple goggles? Like
I think he's gonna be. That's the
yeah.
weird thing about it. Like I mean, this is, I think, the intuition that I have when I say Christ plays an antichrist and trampling down death by death. That's it's the way that he ends this article, which I think is just spot on, which is, where's the end? The medium is the Messiah, and the process of perception is that of incarnation. Like, the more I think about the incarnation, man, it just blows my mind, because that is the person. That's where there is no separation. Like, that's where seeing is believing, and not in the materialistic way. You see. Belief and sight are one. Like, there is no deliberation. It's just like one thing.
Yeah.
I think that's what Christ is talking about when your eye is pure. And when you're like that, to the holy, all things are holy. You make death holy. You make non-being holy. You harrow hell. Hell becomes purification. So, like, it's Polanyi. Unbelief becomes belief, because it is. It's just belief and not that. Like, there isn't. Where are you going to escape? You can't escape it.
Okay, I agree with you, because I mean, I think ultimately that's the thing. But I do think so. Here's my like real thing that I'm trying to figure out is, it seems like Christians are really like want to be on the fence until like something really bad happens, and then like the world as a whole figures it out, and then they will adopt the thing and like Christianize it or whatever. Should we be becoming like earlier adopters is what I'm thinking.
Well, I
And
think some of us are going to be. I mean, that's like me. That's that's the chaos monsters or the chaos dragons. They're going to be the early adopters who go, I mean, the prophets, or theoretically the evangelists, but it's also a recognition that the eye is not the hand, is not the foot. The church has been gifted. Where does Paul list out all the giftings? There's prophets, evangelists, priests, but then there's also the simple. So like, this is where like somebody like me, like I don't worry about syncretism at all. Because my reality, what I see is where like I live in a new creation. Like, what am I syncretizing? Like everything is, Christ has redeemed everything. Like, I just choose to live in that world. And so like, I'm not that afraid of it. I don't think that means that with wisdom, with discernment, that doesn't mean that like,
well, it's all about who's in the top spot. Because if Jesus is below some other aspect in your thing, I mean that's the thing.
I don't know what you mean.
Like as far as like idolatry, like with syncretism, because I think I agree, and actually it was really interesting. So I actually got to meet another corner person like in person yesterday, and we were talking about he went to seminary and was talking about like how he really got a lot out of Karl Barth.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I didn't really read too much of him, and um, because I'd heard from the more conservative people, like Karl Barth's liberal theology is like caused all these problems or whatever. And when I told him like at this point I don't really worry about that so much, but it's like I do see like a lot of the liberal theology as like a tool or something. Like I can, for me, loving Christ, a lot of what comes up in it, like my heart is stirred and I'm warmed by it. But then I see how it's like this powerful tool that if you unleash it widespread in all churches, that's why you have like this collapse of faith in the main line. Like, so like it was they didn't have the wisdom and the the discernment in how to deploy it properly. It's because
Yeah.
necessarily it's not like it's all bad. It's not because that's the problem, is like when we start thinking that way, and then we'd be like, every theologian that doesn't agree with me is is a heretic, and they're like, we just think they're like their whole relationship with God is false or whatever. And I think that's clearly not the case. But what can speak very powerfully for good to one person can be abused by another. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and that's part of I think that's part of just the natural order of things and centers and fringes, and like even for all of my structure and the conservative impulse, because yeah, I know I need to message Nate because I gotta get Nate has given out some wrenches on the channel, but not enough, I don't think, because there needs to be some moderation on the YouTubes.
it was funny because it's like I would love to go to a church that had, like, I would prefer to go to a church that had liberal theology, but finding a church with liberal theology where everybody really loves Jesus is not, that's kind of rare. So I go to the conservative church because people really love Jesus, but it's kind of uh, frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like even sorry, I'm distracted because I'm trying to moderate. Okay, just wait. You're getting put in timeout because you're out of control. Yeah. So but even like the liberal thing, this is why, like I was saying this to T-Grog the other day, and this is why I've always loved metaphysics and ontology, is that there's the Coleridge quote, like it's the privilege of the philosopher to distinguish without division. Like I really encourage intellectuals to get to the place, and this is hard, I think, for the Western either or mind, you need to see that implicitly and tacitly behind any distinction is a higher unity. Like there's a matrix or a womb or a context, a field behind any distinction that allows you to even have the distinction. Otherwise, the two would collapse into one thing, because it's like if you drew two circles on a piece of paper, the paper's implicit, a higher unity behind anything. And you can apply that to anything, the right and the left hand of God, liberal, conservative. So like even liberal Christianity, and I think whatever, I've talked about this before, I think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy, because that's kind of my rant to religious conservatives and irreligious conservatives, is I see liberal Protestantism as being conservative. They're just conservatives with different values. They're trying to hold on to, I mean, I don't know what values, like certain they're trying to hold a particular set of moral codes, whereas conservatives are trying to hold on to a certain set of moral codes, but they're both, that's a conservative impulse by both of them.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I say. Like, and I'm just saying liberal theology is to say, that. So here's an interesting thing, because I would say, like I said, I haven't really read Karl Barth very much, but like
Okay.
of similar people, or I would say even like the way that I can see how you see things, and you'll go all the way to like full, universalism or whatever, or or so I was somebody like that. And then when I read like the Puritans, the people that actually are writing this stuff and coming up with this stuff and talking about how like wretched they are, they're saying this only in comparison to the revelation they've received of how great and how loving God is. So it's like, and it's so, and I really see that they're the same. But then downstream from that, you get POS theology, because people are taking something that person understood in a real revelation of like seeing, like, because it's like the gospel is not you're almost good enough to get into heaven, and Jesus needs to just brush off a little dirt and
Uh-oh. You're back. You went black, but now you're back. Now you went black again. You're muted. There you go. I just can't hear you, though. You're not muted, but I can't hear you. Back in black, exactly. 'Cause I'm back! Neil, you talk
Hey, good
until
morning.
Michael gets his stuff figured out.
I
Well,
just
maybe
wanted
I
to
would
meet
say
Michael.
Michael's great.
I hadn't met Michael yet, so I just want to say hi. And it's a
Nice.
pleasure. And I've only listened to a little bit of your stuff, Michael, but
Oh,
uh,
he's wonderful. Okay, let me try the personal revelation and taking it and applying it broadly. I feel like did that come up in the T-Grog conversation about mystical revelation? Well, but this is the thing. This is why I love oh, Michael, you coming back? This is why
Yeah,
I
I
love
just had to Is it working now?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, I just had to
Keep
refresh.
going if you feel like you can get back into your flow.
Oh yeah, so I mean that's what I see with like the POS technology is somebody, or the theology rather, is somebody taking this thing where somebody, because the like chasm between us and God in terms of like, you know am I almost as good as God, like in any relative sense? Like, no, I suck at loving people or whatever, I'm selfish, all this stuff, blah blah blah. Use and when you are expressing that as a revelation of like how amazing it is that God loves you and forgives you, then it's like a super meaningful thing. But then somebody comes along and takes what you wrote down and they put it on themselves, and just being like, I'm just worthless and I'm a POS, and
Yeah.
it it's a total misapplication of what's going on. So
Well, and this is why I don't know. I love to think like what McLuhan's saying in here, and I love to think about the incarnation so much because even like those dichotomies of faith and works and God or man, God became a man, fully God of fully God. This is why, like my friend Cal and I will talk about the difference between divine simplicity and classical theism and process theism. It's both.
yeah.
Like, and that's the grace I'm trying to say for where you are right now is that, and if everything is grace, including your suffering, including your trials, including your revelation of your sinfulness, that's all grace. So you don't sit there and revel in it and loathe yourself. You take it as a grace to learn and to grow and to evolve. And then that self-revelation of your unworthiness becomes the very means by which you see how much you're loved and your own transformation. But you don't sit there. There's the POS thing that I'm talking about is this concept thing. Again, it's not the percept thing that makes you. It's like the thing that makes me incapable of reading, like I talked about once, that self-compassion workbook. Like where you have a friend and they come and tell you some struggle they're having and some problem, conflict they're having, and you interact with them with just like, and they're maybe struggling with a lot of self-doubt and guilt and shame. And what do you do to someone you love? You constantly affirm them and give them grace and tell them to stop hating themselves. And then this book has you go through this like practice of where you'd write down what you'd say to them and what you'd do to them. And then it asks you to do that to yourself. And I'm just saying, like, incapable of it. Like I can't turn around that same grace on myself. That's POS theology, which is a different thing, but that's a moving from precept to concept. Like this is this evil narrative that you've been told.
So this is the interesting thing, because I would say like I don't experience like because I know that's what you're saying, like the bad way of looking at Calvinism contributes to like that way that people get in thinking of that, and it's
Yeah.
like I wouldn't struggle in that same way, but like
Yeah.
if I went to a liberal church that I probably wouldn't get, or potentially I would hear like the Karl Barth theology driven sermon, and I would just hear it as like, I can just do whatever I want, and like,
Yeah.
and literally have no motivation to become aware of my own selfishness and its impact on those around me or whatever.
Michael, are you do you belong to a denomination that's once saved, always saved?
I mean, I personally, well, I go to a non-denominational church. That's more or less my. I think that the idea of losing salvation is mostly used for like behavior management in most of the churches that I've been to. So I don't like to talk about it, right? I don't fruitful, but
It's somewhat useful, though, isn't it? To imagine that you could lose your salvation. It's somewhat useful even to have a kind of disappointment in yourself, or what some people might call hatred, a dissatisfaction with your own behavior. And I don't know if I were filling out the self-compassion workbook, trying to imagine how you would respond to a friend who is going through something in a loving way. It's not one note, and it's not all a call to, hey, please don't hate yourself. There's somewhat of an invitation to remorse, and of course that will vary from situation to situation and person to person and temperament to temperament. But I'd be very, very hesitant to throw out all this stuff altogether. Even the fear of losing your salvation there's some fear and trembling there that seems valuable, and maybe it's misused a lot, and that's where this sort of thinking is coming from. But
well, here's how I would say it. Like, I would think it more in terms of like, God is our father, and like I have a great father, and I cannot imagine anything that I could possibly do that would cause my father to no longer consider me as his son.
that's right. I think there's probably a practice.
Blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, gentlemen. Blasphemy against the Holy Spirit.
I wouldn't abuse that fact to like treat him horribly. Like my motivation is then like, I don't want to, like, he has great hopes and expectations for me. I want to make him proud. I want to live up to that. So, so that, yeah.
So maybe the idea of losing your salvation is not philosophically true, but maybe it's pragmatically true. It's a way you should understand reality that's helpful to you and others. I feel like there's a lot of that in Hebrews. It shapes the experience in a way that resembles that, and I don't think it resembles that for no reason. Even if you chase it down philosophically all the way and find like, well, that's not actually the case, there's still a way that paradigm is valuable.
The vast majority of Christian history, you could lose your salvation. Orthodox, Roman Catholic, the Protestant ideas are innovations introduced by.
Well, I don't know why the psalmist then would say, T. Grug, that nothing can separate you from the love of God. I mean, there are.
Well, if you're ultimately, the problem is, here's my take on the whole thing. The Bible's not univocal on this stuff. There's contradictory theologies within the Bible. So you're going to derive different theologies. You're going to derive different theologies because they're mutually exclusive.
Let's read some of these passages because these are fun. I used to have these conversations with my buddy Ao. Shout out Ao. I don't think
I'll go get my Bible.
Huh? Yeah. So this is Hebrews 6 is what you're talking about. So Hebrews 6, I'll just read the first part of it, but it says, therefore, leaving the elementary teaching about the Christ, let us press on to maturity, not laying again a foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith toward God, of instruction about washings and laying on of hands and the resurrection of the dead and eternal judgment. And in this we will do if God permits. For in the case of those who have once been enlightened and have tasted of the heavenly gift and have been made partakers of the Holy Spirit, and have tasted the word of God and the powers of the age to come, and then have fallen away, it is impossible to renew them again to repentance, since they again crucified to themselves the Son of God and put him to open shame. For ground that drinks the rain, which often falls on it and brings forth vegetation useful to those for whose sake it was also tilled, receive a blessing from God. But if it yields thorns and thistles, it is worthless and close to being cursed, and it ends up being burned. Yeah, it's a radical text.
But if you contrast that with the Gospel of John, it says, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. That's it. So and nothing can separate us from the love of God, which is found in Christ Jesus our Lord. And so there's different, by the way, just an off-cuff remark, nobody knows who wrote Hebrews, okay? So it's some person, unknown, wrote Hebrews. So that's,
I think it was Joel
I would
Osteen.
say that, well, I would just say this is one of the things that made me question my faith, my former faith. Christians can't agree on anything. Salvation, baptism, regeneration, last things. They can't agree on any of this stuff.
But T-Grog, I would argue
it's like really?
I would argue that's because of technology and the evolution of what's happened with technology. We live in the world of concept rather than percept, and we divide over concept. This is why one of my favorite
They've been
scriptures
about this stuff since the first century. Paul is telling people, these people in Galatia, these people are preaching a false gospel. It's not their technology. He just says, look, let them be under a curse. Christians have been fighting from the beginning about these things. Infant baptism, believer baptism, blah, 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 blah. It's like,
I'm curious, T-Grog, like what keeps you in this space? Like I understand the initial curiosity of opening a box, let's say, and seeing what's in the box.
Because I like hearing you guys talk.
But
I like
why?
It's interesting.
No. Oh, okay. So that right there. It's from.
It's interesting.
Oh, so that right there, like, where do you think that comes from? That interest, like that instinctive interest, like scientifically.
I don't know.
Speaking,
I mean, look, some people are interested in golf. Some people are interested in pickleball. Some people are interested in spiders. I'm interested in this stuff because I think it's interesting. It's part of human development and human history, trying to understand the world. It's cool. It's cool. It's interesting.
See what I'm most interested in is that interest.
Huh?
What I'm most interested in is the interest itself.
Besides the fact that at least I believe that I'm an open-minded person, and if there's things here I can glean, from Marshall McLuhan or Luke or any of you guys or girls.
Here we go. As a woman who wrote Hebrews, T-Grog.
There you go. Well, that's proof. It must be true. So, I mean, look, McLuhan was fanatical cat. Wow, that's amazing. Now, the fact is that if he would say, it'd be interesting since he's dead, we can't really know, but so he's a fanatical Catholic, so he must think Protestantism is false, right?
So I think there's
orthodoxy is false.
So can you do this? Could it be possible to believe, because like this is where I am. I in as much as I know conceptually and propositionally, I like the Orthodox Church. I don't really know honestly where I stand.
And by the way, you guys are nice guys. I'm not trying to piss anybody off here.
No. I'm trying to work out a thought here. So like propositionally and conceptually, I like the Orthodox Church. And I would say that like if I just want to look at their theology, I like that. That's what I think is correct. But again, that's the world of concept.
Right.
The world of percept is where you live, because that's where being is. That's where reality manifests to you. That's where love happens. That's where I think truth, goodness, beauty, like the things, as the point is to live everything, as I like to quote Rilke. That's where actual holiness happens, is in the world of the percept, not in the world of the concept. That's where you're actually loving people, where you are acting, where you're being in the world.
Faith without works is dead.
Yes.
Right? Being alone.
So like,
Yeah.
in that world, there's holy people in every branch of Christianity. There's the good Muslim. There's the good Buddhist. There are people living in the world of percept that are loving people well, regardless of how they conceptualize it.
Yeah, I understand. So what do you need Christianity for?
You maybe don't.
You do,
So,
and you're
okay.
you're shackled to the concept. You're bound to the concept in a way that you can't escape, at least for now. And you shouldn't limit yourself to the concept, but there's no use in pretending that you're not bound to it.
I'm not saying those things aren't important. And like, this is where like Mitch is helpful for me. I'm on one end of the extreme when it comes to talking about these things, because my mode is very much at live at peace with where you are now. You can't make yourself believe something you don't believe, and there's no point in trying. So like, if you find the tenets of anything like untenable for you, then let them go. It doesn't matter. That doesn't mean, Mitch, this is where I'll affirm you, that doesn't mean that I don't believe that the concepts and the truth of those things have to reconcile at some point. I just don't think you can force it.
I would add as more of a question responding to that. This belief thing, you can't make yourself believe something that you believe. Is that reducing belief to like an emotional response? Because I do think that there's a lot to believe where you're communing with those around you. You're intellectually deciding to believe something, and I don't think that's false. I don't think that's being false necessarily.
No. I think it's when Christ says, unless I forget the exact word, unless your virtue exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you never find the kingdom of heaven. It's like, if you pretend to be better than you actually are, that's what the danger is. So the guy who's a sinner and beats his chest and says, oh man, I need you, Christ. Like, or he's not saying that to Christ, he's saying that to God, obviously. But that humility, that fundamental humility before the absolute terror of not being able to control reality. Like, I cannot control reality, and I'm terrified that reality has a personality, that reality is intended, and I have zero control over that intent. That is the terror of God, and that's the beginning of wisdom.
So I would like to deal with this question, because I like this one. I mean, is belief an act of the will? I think that's related to what you were saying a little bit, or getting at. And I would say no. This is where I really like, I mean, it depends on what you mean by that. Again, let's use the lightsaber of what do you mean by that? Because St. Maximus distinguishes two types of will, where one is the gnomic or deliberative will, the will that's choosing either or, this or that. And then the natural will is the will that is acclimated to God, or I would call Christ in me, where Christ says in the garden, not my will, but your will. He submits his will to the will of the Father, and in so doing, finds who he truly is. And so I would say, in as much as you are true belief, true and proper belief, love, when you're acting, when faith and sight and everything becomes one, when it's all just one thing, you're not deliberate. I don't think Christ, well, even Christ, this is where I don't know. I would say this is where I'll bring in Sam Tiedemann. Even Jesus as a human being was learning obedience by what he suffered. I mean, the scriptures tell us that too.
I like that you're describing ideal belief, but I think that there's some other levels in there too, where you find some evidence that isn't necessarily kind of internalized, felt evidence, and you're willing to fall in line with that, despite your doubts, despite maybe some inclinations to the contrary. I don't think that's false, and it's definitely in some ways, all you have is what you will upon, not because that's all there is, but because you can't do anything else. You can't do anything with the rest, right? There are things beyond your will, but all you can deal with is the will. And so if there's a sense of belief or kind of the unity of behavior and thought that you have, it's not something that you were able to do anything about. It's something that was offered to you and given to you. And so to me, it just makes the most sense to stick with the will stuff.
There's a feedback loop between like beliefs or faith, you know, and this is one of those things where, you know, it's probably more better to say faith as like trust, you know, and our will. Like there's like a feedback loop, you know, our actions inform our beliefs and what, you know, what we do with, you know, but until it gets to a point where it's closed off. Because if you're absolutely certain about anything and no one can convince you otherwise, then that's it. No one can convince you otherwise, including, you know. So
well, and I like to distinguish between believing and thinking.
yeah,
Believing for me is this is where I think Peterson's very right on, and I mean I think this is true biblically and within a lot of Christian tradition, is that you act what you believe. What you do is what you believe. What you think is a very different thing. The way that I think of thinking and ideas and concepts is its potential, like its potency and act. Thinking is potential. It's how you orient yourself to the future. There's a great video on this from Jordan Peterson where he talks about free will, where he says, like, the further a decision is from you, the more free you are. Like, if you're going to make a decision in 2 years, you're very free in relation to it. But as that decision approaches you, because you can do a lot of things to orient yourself in different ways toward it. But as that decision approaches you in time, freedom closes into absolute determinacy at the point of act.
I gotta
concept,
go, but I got one last thing to say, which is,
yeah, do it.
I think of belief as very similar to what T. Grog was describing as interest, in that when an interest pops into your head or pops into your mind, you do have some discernment or some choice in how you engage with that interest. You could say, no, that's wrong, right? That's a temptation. I'm gonna push away from that interest. Or you can say, oh, that's interesting, and let's follow this thread, and let's follow the yellow brick road, and let's see where it leads. And I think of grace as the first step of that, as God reaching out his hand, let's say. So it is a choice, but it is also not a choice. It's received. Like you don't choose what you're interested in. As much as I try, I cannot get interested in certain things my wife is interested in. I can't do it. I don't have that choice. But if the choice is presented to me and then I can take and I can develop and I can grow. So that's the last thing I wanted to say. That's the left brain, right brain dance.
Well, and a lot of times, like the alcoholic knows this too. Thanks, Neil. Is that because Chad would say this kind of thing all the time? I would argue all the time, because again, those Libet studies that Rupert Sheldrake talks about, by the time you think you're making a decision, you've already made the decision. Like that's in your head. You've already decided. Like by the time the alcoholic thinks he's making the decision to drink, he's already made it. Like it's over.
Well, just getting back, I just want to point out something. We talked about faith and stuff. Christians don't agree on that either. What faith? Agree on that. These are simple words. And then there's been endless fights over what these words mean, what their application is. It's like almost like it's a human construction. There's no Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit guiding any of this stuff. It's just sociology, social psychology. There's no there. They don't agree on anything. It's bad. I mean, if you want to be a Christian, because you can't decide who's right.
Well, I mean, I think that the contradictions or the apparent contradictions between the Bible and the various, because I'm not really interested in like what is the right thing, or if there is an absolute right understanding. It's going to take thousands more years for us to get there. So I mean, I think that all the splits and things like that is because there's such a diversity of types of people that are created, we can't all hear the same message the same way. Which I was saying, like when one person responds to liberal theology in a wonderful way, and another person doesn't, and the same thing with a more conservative theology or whatever. The thought I had earlier on when we were first starting the conversation about the way we communicate, like Israel's is the chosen people or whatever. It's supposed to be a nation of priests to the world. So they're
the Bible.
share this message, but like these weird laws that God tells them, like don't clip the hair around your ears, leave the fringe of your garments, leave the corners of your field undone. To me, I see those all as like, because these are the people that bear God's name. It's like intentional sloppiness or finiteness or imperfection to help maybe distinguish that you are a finite, imperfect thing, full of brokenness, that's living in a way to point people to a perfect thing. And and it's like this is a really interesting story I can share from my own experience about, like, so my dad grew up Catholic, and he was very depressed, and he wanted to kill himself. He was considering killing himself, but he had been taught that to commit suicide is a mortal sin, and if you commit suicide, you go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think that is necessarily a theologically accurate truth, but you could definitely debate it. But it caused him to choose not to kill himself, and then he became born again, and it set our whole, like, my existence. I have to contribute to that experience. So what can I say? Like, I don't agree with. Maybe I don't think that that's a theologically defendable position, but I have to owe my life and my existence to that. So it's wanting it to be fully understandable is a big mistake that I think we make. It's not. But Christians should be people that love people, and hopefully those who aren't Christians want us to be their neighbor, because we're doing it the right way.
So, Michael, when the Apostle Paul said in Galatians that these people should be accursed for preaching a different gospel, do you think that was congruent with what you're saying there? That we should just love everybody and nobody really knows what, we just have to be so charitable? And
no, I don't. I think that the conflict is good. I think that people have to choose. I just think.
But he says they're cursed. They should be cursed by God. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Well, within
was the
that,
Apostle Paul wrong about that? Was he wrong?
No,
within that
means necessarily, like, are they going to get warts and stuff, or like, are they going to like, what does it mean by being cursed? I mean, we can't.
Good question.
No.
Good question.
I mean, because if God does on occasion do miraculous things, it's because he wants a certain outcome. But if most of the time he lets things just happen as they do, it's because it's not so messed up that he can't fix it, I guess.
Well, and also there's other assumptions in there too, like what is the gospel? Because usually the way it seems like to me that you're framing it is a set of propositions, which is not what I think the gospel is.
Nobody knows what it is.
Huh?
Is that what you're saying? Are you saying nobody knows what it is?
Well, no, it's kind of presupposed too by saying, what does it mean to preach a different gospel than what Paul is saying?
Right. What does that mean? Yeah.
I gotta go here in a second and see about Junior, but I will say it might be easy to mistake a lot of the tension between Christians and the disagreements between Christians as unloving, but I don't think that's always the case. And I also think that it's easy to mistake process for identity. And then the final thing I think is, and one thing that I always hold on to is, and I may be taking it out of context, but it's in Philippians 3. And he says, if on any matter we see things differently, this too will be revealed to you. So there's this constant faith that there's going to be this unity in the body. And I think that's a faith we hold on to. My life is short. And anyways, it's good talking to you guys.
Thanks for coming, Mitch.
See you guys soon.
Dude.
Somebody thinks I'm obnoxious. Well, I'm trying not to be.
No, not at all. I mean, this is
I'm
part of
now.
This is part of the tendency that I want to fight. Like I was listening to I was listening to the most recent Rogan episode where he had this guy on I'd never heard of, but who talks a lot about status, which I don't know. I had a bunch of issues with it, but one of the things that he talked about really early on the podcast is something that I very much agree with, is that there's this certain super old, I don't know, probably like part of our reptilian limbic brain that PVK's here, that where we want to this kind of identity that we have, and I think this is part of our evolution of consciousness, of like where you relate to the new biggest identity group outside of, it's not ethnic and familial identity anymore, which is old school tribal identity. It's not necessarily even national identity anymore, which kind of evolved in the modern nation states post World War I and II, where it's just like, I'm German, I'm Russian, I'm American. Now we live in the identity land of where we self-identify most. Whether I'm Christian, I'm American, I'm, I like the Kansas City Chiefs.
Cephas, Christ.
I follow Paul. I follow Cephas. Yes. And I think,
See, I know the Bible. I do know a little bit about it.
Right. And I think all that stuff is, we have a very natural limbic tendency, I think, to want to to have this happen. In PVK's live stream the other day, when you were just on his channel the other day again, Rick Walker showed up, who's just like this evangelical Southern Baptist type, and we had kind of this immune response to just be like, no, this isn't our people. Get him out of here.
I like Southern Baptist.
Right. Or you come on.
I like everybody. Yeah, I mean, I think they're wrong, but it's clear what they think.
Yes.
It's very clear.
I don't want this community to be one that has that reaction. I want the tension here. Like Mitch,
I appreciate that. I think that's good.
Right.
I just want to know what's true.
I don't think you're going to know it by the
that's
process
what I'm
you're trying to know it.
I don't care what it is. If it's Zen Buddhism or Hare Krishna, I don't.
In what way is a mother's love true?
Huh?
In what way is a mother's love true?
Well, you could look at a mother's love as behaviors toward her child. I think that's one way to look at it. What her internal mental states are, I don't know what they are.
They're varied.
But it's the behavior that we can see.
Yeah.
There are many mothers who claim, "Oh, I love my children. I love them." And they treat them like garbage, as you know. You're a pastor.
Yeah.
So all I can look at is behavior. I don't know your parent. I'm a parent. There's many you don't feel loving toward your children because they can be a pain in the ass, frankly. Sorry for the bad language here, but you have a picture in your mind of what being a loving and good parent is, and you try and live up to that standard as best you can.
Yep.
One of the things I tried to do as a parent was I never lied to my children. If they asked me a question, I would just tell them the truth. When they started talking about Santa Claus, I said, Santa Claus is an idea in our minds of goodness and kindness and generosity. He's not a real person who lives at the North Pole, guys. Why did I do that, Paul? Because I want my children to trust me. And when they ask me a question, they're going to go, well, Dad may not tell us something that we like to hear, but he's going to tell us the truth to the best of his ability.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
so
right.
I'm not going to BS you about the tooth fairy or whatever. But yeah, it's an interesting problem, and these problems are complicated. I'm not denying that, the idea of consciousness and all this stuff, but that's on the outer edge of human knowledge. That's on the extreme limits of human knowledge.
Wouldn't you say that truth is on the extreme limits of human knowledge?
Well, I saw. I'm trying to think of his name, but he's a famous atheist philosopher. His name's Rosenberg at Duke, and he said, "We don't have a good theory of truth. We don't have a good theory of it."
And yet we know that a mother's love can be true. So those two things live together in the same universe.
I tend to look at truth as a characteristic of propositions. I think, is a mother's love true? Is that a way to describe? It's like saying, I sleep blue. Is it a category mistake? Is your behavior toward our children congruent with our ideas of what love is?
Well,
in other cultures, other different ideas of love is, right?
Robin Hood's aim was true. We say that. We use that word for that.
Well, he hit the bullseye, right? If he hit the apple off the kid's head and didn't go through his head, yeah.
And mother, well, that's William Tell.
Okay, sorry, my bad. I'm not an expert on mythology, so
he just wants to make sure you're true.
I appreciate. Look, I don't mind being corrected.
No, you're wonderful. That's why we love you here, and I love. We need more of you in this corner, because we keep running out, and so because these are all the questions. What you're doing, challenging us and voicing these things, are helping the people in this corner to be more true and truthful, because sort of where these of course, we're all sort of downstream from Jordan Peterson in this place. And these are all the kinds of issues that Jordan Peterson raised. And but the things that I just walked through right now, very similar to what Jordan Peterson did with Maps of Meaning, because Jordan Peterson at the beginning of that book says you can conceptualize the world as a place of objects and correspondence with objects, or you can conceptualize the world in a very different way, and especially in terms of relationships. And correspondence is one kind of relationship, but the truth of a mother's love is sort of in this. A lot of what we've been doing is kind of going back and forth with McGilchrist, doing these two sides of conceptualization, percept and concept. A lot of these dualities get at this idea of, you can point to a mother, the truth of a mother's love. I did a funeral for a friend of mine. It was an African American community. He was an African American friend of mine, and a lot of the other black pastors are a little put out that there was a white pastor doing the eulogy, but I was his friend, and we and he grew up in a bad area of LA, and his mother scrubbed floors. Stereotypical story. His mother scrubbed floors so that she could put him in a good college, and he went to law school and he's a very successful guy in the political realm here in California. And her love for him was true. Now, there was part of the truth of that love was when, like gangs were sniffing around and he wasn't doing his homework. Boy, she rode him hard, because she was going to make sure that he didn't wind up in jail or dead like so many other of his contemporaries. Her love was true, and that truth pointed him in a direction that gave him life. And so that's a very valid aspect of truth. And so part of where we are as a culture is wrestling with these definitions of truth. And there's no question that
can you just rephrase that and say it led to good outcomes? In other words, what was it? Truth? Well, I mean, he could become a corrupt politician. There's a lot of those walking around, or a corrupt lawyer. I've met a few of those too. So I would just say she tried to have the best outcome she could for her child. Was it a true outcome? Was it I just wouldn't phrase it like that. I just say it's an outcome congruent with her dreams for her. I suppose there's mothers out their sons to be drug dealers. I mean, makes a lot of money that way. So I mean, but the idea of it's true, or I don't know if I'd speak about that.
And that is helpful too, because it recognizes that, I mean, part of what Peterson early on too before his rocket ride, had a very interesting conversation where one of the things that we do with technology and science and this correspondence use of truth is we take the moral valence out of it. We don't ask whether this technology is good. We ask whether this mechanism works. And then we worry about goodness later on. We can do that with the internal combustion engine. Is the internal combustion engine good? Is it true? They're right away there. Then we have, there's certain chemical properties that when harvested in a particular way achieve certain outcomes. But basically what we're dealing with is the fact that one reductive conceptualization of the universe shows these two competing realms within the universe. And a lot of philosophers have dealt with this. But part of what we did in, say Galileo's up in his tower and he's dropping balls. And he figures out truth in terms of, gravity, acceleration, Newtonian physics. He figures out truth. Now, he doesn't ask, is it good to drop balls from? Now, if someone's walking below and they get hit with a ball and they get injured, well, then you're sort of in this other realm. And the fact is we live between these two worlds. And language bridges those two worlds. They have to, because we live, that's that percept world that Luke was talking about, where it's all sort of mixed in together. And part of what we began to recognize was this language of correspondent truth in terms of a world of object has very good utility, but not quite as satisfying as we wanted, because within that world, we sort of began to imagine that a human being is sort of like one of these alligators you find in Florida. In an alligator farm, you find these enormous alligators that are just sitting in a pool of warm water. And I remember talking to the guy and I say, doesn't he get bored? No, an alligator has a really small brain. As long as I keep throwing chicken at him, that big thing will just sit in that pond and relax. We're not like that. We live in these two worlds. And so much of this corner is figuring out, what are these two worlds like? And that's where this truth argument gets going. And I would say, just in terms of my my Calvinist brothers and sisters, who tend to also be highly modernistic, they sort of tried to create a technology of theology to achieve an outcome. And they accomplished a fair amount by it. But I think a lot of people like Luke have left that because they felt like they oversold their program. Now, part of that had to do with elements of the program, but I think part of it had to do with the sales of systems itself, that we as modernist people have this particular faith in systems. And so I think a lot of what our conversations are about is recognizing the limited utility and truth of particular systems while also understanding their limitations. And so then all of these conversations about truth, about these two worlds, about models and stories, we're trying to improve these systems by improving our language. I'm sorry for going on too long.
No, that's fine. I go back. I keep coming back to this. How does this? I mean, I don't mind having conversations with people, but how does this all this talk about models and all this stuff just not collapse into total relativism and solipsism? In other words, well, in my mind, I think it's true. So, and the only thing I know is my mind. So, I've read enough historic Christianity, creedal Christianity, that they say these are the things you have to believe are true.
And
they don't say, well, they're
saying,
models of reality, they're models of Jesus, they're models of the Bible. It doesn't. That's not.
And it's kind of like a science class. These are the things you have to believe. Now, someone might step back and say, well, why is believing all of this science helpful? Well, maybe if you want to become an engineer and build cars or buildings or bridges or something, these are the things you have to believe. These are the formulas. These are the physics, the Newtonian formulas of physics. This is how differential equations works.
They work.
They do work. They do work.
But they do work.
But do you have to believe them? Most of humanity has lived just fine without believing them.
That's true. And most of humanity's lived in squalor for
that's right.
thousands and tens of thousands of years. So sure. Yeah.
And the very tiny little group of humanity that has lived with almost unlimited resources have not necessarily gotten what they wanted from their limitless resources either. Which
That's
again
true.
leads us to these difficult questions of what makes a life worth living.
Affluenza, yeah. Modern people, when you do studies and you just ask them, they're the least happy. The richest people are usually the least happy.
And so in terms of these systems that you have to believe, a big part of this conversation has come because certain systems have been oversold and people have found them wanting. And so they abandon those systems. But part of what we've learned about human beings is even if your system is implicit, the stuff beneath us is sort of like a system. And it often bears, you're doing it yourself because you're challenging our systems. And that's great because a challenged system potentially is an improved
I just
system.
know what's going on. Yeah, if I can't discern truth from falsehood in your system, that's a problem.
Yeah. But and part of what we're getting at is these balances of truth and falsehood, they're a little bit more complicated than let's say the kinds of truth or falsehood that you have in your engineering lab.
So Paul, let me put this to you. So why listen to Jordan Peterson? Why not listen to Deepak Chopra? He says a lot of the same kind of stuff.
I don't know that he says a lot of the same kind of stuff.
Or let me see, Guru Maharaji or Bhagwan Rashid, or
I've listened to a number of these people, and I've also listened to Steven Pinker and Sam Harris. And part of what the internet gives us is the opportunity to listen to a lot of these people. And I will be the first one to tell you that the easiest con is the religious con. As a pastor, I know that because I can tell the power I have just because of my valence as a religious person. And I also, however, want to know the kind of truth that a mother's love possesses. And I am a recipient of that because I'm the recipient of the true love of my mother and the true love of my father.
Of course.
And watching my father truly love people. And
that's great.
Well, but Deepak Chopra will say something like that.
Of course he will.
And
he's not wrong about that.
No. And so then the question is, okay, where do I stop be leaving Deepak Chopra? So I've got a lot of
That
friends
is a
in
good
Northern
question.
California. I've got a lot of friends in Northern California that are super new age. They are practitioners. They are practitioners in tuning forks, and they are practitioners in crystals and
Crystals, yes.
breathing. And these are good friends of mine.
Yes.
And you know, this optimal grip thing that Vervaeke talks about. So I look at them, and these are wonderful people. We raised our children together. They were my neighbors. We did all of these things, and I love them. And you know, I could give them the keys to my car, the keys to my house, the numbers to my bank account. I would trust them. That's all fine. But I do look at their lives, and often they look naive to me. And I think that's tends to be the difficulty I have with some of my woo friends. And then I look at some of my Christian friends who tend to be much more modernist. They're living in much more modern systems, and they have this critique that they inherited from the Enlightenment. And I really appreciate that, because it does ring out a lot of bullshit. But I also sometimes look at their systems and think, you know, they're really reliable people, but they've got some BS in their systems too. And so I just try to look at all of these things and continue to work on them to wring out the BS. But BS comes in lots of different ways. Sometimes BS.
So how do you tell the difference between truth and BS? How do you discern the difference between truth and BS?
Well, like, so when my new age friends got a divorce, I mean, so the wife said to the husband, you know, basically, I don't want to be in this anymore. And so then they decided, well, we don't really need to get a divorce. We're going to just, you know, that way I can stay in the same medical plan, blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, she's a really bad money manager. She starts taking out loans. He begins to recognize, holy crap, we're not divorced. All of the loans all the debt she takes on, I'm responsible for. And guess where these two wind up? You know.
Yeah, it's a disaster. I understand that. But I let me tell you something. I have a friend who's both her husbands were Southern Baptists, fine gentlemen, and they did the same damn thing.
Yep.
So
yep.
I wouldn't
so
say,
that's
you
where
know,
you see BS. But it's sort of an optimal fit thing, because like Jordan Peterson said, you use multiple variables. But the thing is, when you're evaluating these people, you say, well, number one, they're human beings. And so we know all of these things by psychology and theology.
Well, they're wicked sinners, right?
Exactly. That's kind of the easiest one to see. And so then when I see a theological system that says something like total depravity, I think, that system has something. And my new age friends don't tend to have that. Their model of humanity tends to be really optimistic. And so when I look at Deepak Chopra and I look at Jordan Peterson has what I would call an Augustinian anthropology, meaning a suspicion about human beings. And I think, yeah, I'm gonna listen to that more than Deepak, because he seems to be a little bit too optimistic about our good intentions and our policies.
Well, I understand. You're looking at data and you're making a judgment based on the data that you are perceiving. Of course, you got to watch confirmation bias and all those things. But yeah, I don't find disagree with her. I think that, you know, if I live in Utah, and you know, the Mormon people, the devout Mormons I know, they say, well, people outside the church, they're not really happy. True happiness is found within the one true church, see. And they get revelations too. As a matter of fact, they're constantly getting revelations about all sorts of bizarre things. And I see the problem is when we talk in these ways that, you know, great to talk and use big words and all that stuff. But when it makes it more blurry between, what's real and what's not real, and what am I imagining and what am I not imagining, I see that as very dangerous. And I was in a stream the other day, and you were talking about people leaving the church. I said, all Paul's got to do, have healing services, speak in tongues, prosperity gospel. Paul, you'll pack them in.
Yeah,
Pack them
yeah.
in. Believe
And I
me.
can't do that.
Well,
For all the reasons you just laid out.
They're
I can't do that.
successful.
Yeah, but I don't want that kind of success.
People
And
must
the same
need
thing
that,
is on YouTube. Right. And you're
They must
exactly
need
right.
it.
You're exactly right. And so you look at these systems and you say, okay, so there's a degree of BS in what the Mormons are talking about with respect to their system, but there's also a degree of truth in it. Because,
Well, of
for
course.
example, Nancy Percy in her recent book was talking about the fact that and they're trying again to get objective because that's kind of our cultural fascination. He noted that the men who are worse to their wives tend to be the nominally religious. The secularists tend to do better, and the really practicing religious tend to do better. It's the nominally religious that tend to use religious arguments, biblical arguments for headship as an excuse to take advantage of the women in their lives. And that's believable, but it shows this dynamic that in just to look at the Mormons, and you and I are on the same page that I don't think the Mormon origin story holds a lot of water. To me, Mormonism, sort of like Islam, is kind of a religious mixture of some things that were found in upstate New York.
That's because you're an atheist and you don't believe in the supernatural. See, you're just a skeptic.
I do believe in the supernatural, but I don't like the conception. I don't like the framework. But the point is that, and you know this, living in Utah, Mormonism kind of works, kinda.
Sure. There's a lot of good people in Mormonism, and there's a lot of rotten people in Mormonism too.
Yep.
So
they're wonderful people, and I know. And so then one of my friends who was a multi-addicted homeless man was also raised deeply Mormon in Utah. And I lived with 10 years, this guy slept against my office door. And so we knew each other really well. And, I learned a lot of Mormon theology from him because he knew his stuff. Right. And he just couldn't live sobriety.
Right.
But again, I see all of this, and so I look at Mormons and I say, boy, they're good people. There's something in that works.
Yeah, and there's a lot of charlatans, believe me.
There's that too.
We're number one in white collar crime here in Utah. Number one.
Really? So
per capita, number one, white collar crime.
But this little corner, I think, is about working this optimal grip on this massive multivariant equation for the search for truth, just like you're on.
Back to the story.
Go ahead. I don't mean to monopolize things here.
So me neither. I gotta shower. So go.
I gotta go too. I gotta go.
What happened?
Thanks, guys.
But the truth matters in regard to that. He didn't have faith in God, but he knew that the Catholic Church taught something, and so he thought maybe that's true, and that doubt was enough to keep him from taking his life. So I don't know. Well, that was a good thing that if the people that were still there had been able to hear it, I think. But anyway, that's their responsibility because I said what I said. So hey, new guys.
Hey, are you quitting?
Howdy. What's up, gentlemen? I was gonna start closing it out, but we can chat for a while, or you guys can just talk and close it out whenever you want to.
Sure. I'm cool with either one. It's the Zoomers who are taking over.
The Zoomers. Jason, are you froze? What are you doing?
Uh-oh. He's gone.
Regular Christians in like 200 years. They're gonna say, yeah, the Book of Mormon is Jason?
I don't know what he said.
Yeah, you're chopping up. Jason and Michael are Jason. Yeah, Jason's been raptured.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go do work.
All right, then, buddy.
I am interested to see what's going to happen to the LDS Church in the future. It seems like it's a really interesting time. Like, there are like public apostates like Dan McLuhan who like have an official position or like are actively saying that the church is not true on all their YouTube channels, but they're not being removed at all.
Oh, I don't know about this at all.
Dan McLuhan, he's a famous like Bible scholar, very, very liberal, pretty much.
Yeah, no, I don't. But this is within the Mormon Church?
Yeah, yeah. So it's really interesting because I think he has like a really, really interesting story. So he was like 19 and he knew that the Mormon Church was not really true, but he just kind of liked it, and now he sort of says like, I sort of want a Mormon Church that has all the symbolism, but none of the beliefs. Like he's a Marxist, so he says like, I want a Mormon church without like bad power structures.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is a little bit of what Paul's been ruminating on recently with these newer religions. Like he's been talking about it in relation to Islam, but I guess you could say it in relation to Mormonism too. Is like in the age of the internet, what's going to happen?
Yeah. I've been doing research on Noahides. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. I mean, I've followed it a little bit just through Jacob's channel and Chezi and those guys. So I mean, I know of it a little bit, but yeah.
I've been digging into like different papers on it, and it's really the first religion I would say that can only exist in the internet, pretty much. Because how it works is pretty much there's this institute called the Third Temple Institute, which is very Zionist, and pretty much part of their flavor of Zionism is that we want all humans to follow the 7 Noahide laws. So what sort of happens is there's the largest Noahides are actually in the Philippines, which is very surprising. And so how it works is whenever they have a question, they'll ask somebody in Israel in the Third Temple Institute, and then they'll give them advice. So it's sort of like they are a congregation that is sort of controlled by people in Israel like 1,000 miles away. Yeah.
That's kind of fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the internet is trying to think about, like, I don't know. In the beginning of this, I read that thing from McLuhan. Thinking about McLuhan stuff, and then thinking about it in terms of the internet age, is a trip. Like there are some things. Like I always feel like I'm a fairly intuitive person that's on the fringe that conceptualizes very high, broad patterns that seem unrelated to a lot of people. And McLuhan is like well beyond me. He's like seeing stuff that I have a hard time finding connections with.
Who's McLuhan?
Marshall McLuhan. So he's the guy who's I read this article this morning that was talking a lot about McLuhan, just in relation to his deep religion and Catholicism, which is something he didn't really talk about publicly that much. But he's known for his most famous aphorism is the medium is the message. And so he has a lot of reflections on technology and knowledge and belief and how those things relate that have influenced people like Neil Postman and a lot of modern people. But really brilliant guy.
Yeah.
So
the future is going to be really interesting because, like, have you heard of the Second Great Awakening?
No.
So in the 1800s, religious attendance was only 17%. But during that created the largest fervor, and you had 3 of the major groups that came out of that, which was the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Seventh-day Adventists.
Okay,
and we had such a boom from that. And what I'm noticing now is when we see the sort of fall of like the mainline and like regular Christian attentions, things get weird because like in the articles I was reading on Noahites, none of them are Muslim. They're all just Protestants that sort of just fell out. And I think that we're going to see some more and more interesting mutations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. It's an interesting time, and I find it to be fun, but I'm kind of a chaos monster, so it doesn't really upset me that much. All right, I think I'm gonna wrap this up because I gotta move on with my day. But thanks for popping in. Thanks everybody else, and I think PVK's got a live stream at noon. Or what time is it? 10 o'clock your guys' time, Trey?
Okay.
All right, and we'll see you later. Thanks everybody.